You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got breaking news here that's going to have major implications, major ramifications on Donald Trump's ability to deploy the troops. And I know it's been a little bit of a mixed bag these last couple of days, but we've actually got some bit of a silver lining here in this latest decision from a judge. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Yeah, Brian, a federal district court judge in Illinois has extended for 30 days her prohibition, telling the Trump administration, no, you may not deploy National Guard troops onto the streets of Chicago or into the state of Illinois. But Brian, there is so much swirl. There are so many different court cases in the trial courts, in the courts of appeal, and of course, Donald Trump is trying desperately to get the Supreme Court to sort of Bigfoot all of these, court proceedings, grab hold of this issue. And what he's hoping is they will give him and what he's hoping is that the Supreme Court will give him carte blanche to militarize the streets of America from coast to coast. We'll see what the Supreme Court does when it inevitably grabs hold of this case. But right now, if we can kind of review the different cases and the stages of the proceedings of each case. In Chicago, Judge April Perry just once again said, no, you do not have adequate evidence that there's a rebellion, that there's an insurrection, or that the federal government cannot enforce the law with regular forces. So she extended for 30 days her prohibition that she had put in place previously against troops being sent into the streets of Illinois. Now, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals has already affirmed that ruling in a 3-judge unanimous opinion. So that is settled as far as that federal jurisdiction is concerned. But what has Donald Trump done? He's run up to the Supreme Court trying to get the court to take the Seventh Circuit case and reverse it. Now, if we move out to Portland, what we saw was that a Trump-appointed judge, Karen Immergut, ruled that, no, you do not have the evidence to deploy the military, federalize the National Guard, and deploy the military to the streets of Portland. But, Brian, unfortunately, in recent days, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which sits atop Oregon, California, and other states, reversed Judge Immergut 2-1 in a 3-judge panel opinion, with 2 Trump judges ruling in favor of Donald Trump in a way that I do not believe the facts or the law allows. And the dissenting judge, Judge Susan Graber, said exactly that, and in a pretty unusual forward-leaning dissent. She said not only will this be viewed as an absurd result, but she urged the authorities, the state attorneys, the state attorney general office for Oregon, to ask for en banc, full appellate court review from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals of that 2-1 panel split. So now let's go out to California, because out there has been a whole trial held on the issue of whether Donald Trump can lawfully deploy the military to the streets of Los Angeles. After that trial, Judge Charles Breyer ruled that no, he can't. It's unlawful. It's unconstitutional. That matter is also before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And now, Brian, we hear rumblings from Trump that he wants to put troops in the streets of San Francisco. He wants to send troops into the streets of Memphis. Our nation is a hot mess because we have an aspiring day one dictator, Donald Trump's words, not mine, who is determined to sow chaos and confusion and endanger everyone, the military, the National Guard, and the civilian citizenry alike by, injecting military troops everywhere. And this is a move that, as Judge Perry said, is nothing more than Trump adding fuel to a fire he started. But that is a rough overview of the state of play across all of the federal courts and the federal circuits on the militarization of the streets of America.
I do want to note for folks who are watching right now, if you'd like to continue following along with this, given the fact that there are so many cases ongoing right now and that it looks like it's only going to get more and more, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. I'm going to put the links to both of these channels in the post description of this video. Glenn, it's worth asking here, to what extent is all of this really just an academic exercise, knowing full well that this thing will eventually make its way to the Supreme Court? Like, do these trial court and appellate court decisions really have any impact when it gets up to the Supreme Court, where we have seen these justices rule very often just along party lines in favor of the president?
In normal times, yes, it matters. Trial court rulings matter. Most directly, Brian, they matter because only trial court judges can enter findings of fact about whether Donald Trump has the goods to back up his claim that we're experiencing an insurrection, a rebellion, or an inability to execute the laws of the nation with regular forces. Only trial court judges get to make those factual findings. Appeals courts and the Supreme Court are prohibited from making factual findings or disagreeing with the factual findings of the trial court judge unless they are clearly erroneous and not supported by ample evidence, which factual findings rarely are. But, let me answer your question directly now. Isn't this all academic? Because the Supreme Court has been willing time and again to allow Donald Trump to expand presidential power even when lower court judges are finding that he's acting lawlessly, that he's acting unconstitutionally. The answer is the Supreme Court has basically bowed down to Donald Trump each and every time for reasons that I can't for the life of me explain. But I'm with you, unfortunately, that I think this is all academic, because when the Supreme Court inevitably grabs hold of these cases, and it will, why? Because you now have different federal courts of appeal ruling differently about what presidential power allows in these circumstances. And the circumstances are quite similar across the spectrum of all of these cases. Donald Trump creates chaos with his masked agents, running roughshod over the constitutional rights of not only undocumented workers, but American citizens. So the citizens exercising their First Amendment free speech rights and their right to assemble address it in the only way they know how, the only way they are allowed to. In fact, the only way the Constitution guarantees they are allowed to address it, with their First Amendment rights. And then Donald Trump says, well, look at all this chaos and upset in the streets. Now I have to send the military in. This is chaos that Donald Trump is creating so he can exploit it. But I'm telling you, Brian, I'm not a betting man. $1 is my betting limit. I would probably put a full 75 or 80 cents of my max $1 bet on the Supreme Court giving Donald Trump the green light to militarize the entirety of the United States of America.
Can you talk about this idea of soldiers or any federal troops opting to disobey unlawful orders? And so if we see, for example, that there is no violence to be quelled, but rather that the deployment of these troops is what incites violence, what kind of duty or obligation do these federal troops have in terms of refusing to obey unlawful orders?
Brian, it's a great question, and I actually have some firsthand experience in this because as a former Army JAG, active duty military prosecutor for 6.5 years, I had to wrestle with these issues. For example, if a commander gave a soldier an order that proved to be unlawful, I, as the prosecutor and as the legal advisor to the commander, would have to deliver the bad news to the commander and say, you can't court-martial the soldier because the order you gave was not lawful, which is why in these situations you need JAG officers up front offering opinions and legal advice to military commanders on what kind of orders they can give and what kind of orders they can't give. The problem is, of course, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump have been trying to fire JAG Corps leadership across all of the military services. Why? Because Hegseth says that, JAGs are an impediment to what Hegseth wants the military to do. Well, they're not so much an impediment as they are trying to make sure that the military conducts itself in a lawful and constitutional way. So we are taught, both in officer basic training, I was taught, again at the Army's JAG school, where lawyers go to learn how to be Army lawyers before they enter active duty. We are taught that, one, you must obey lawful orders, but two, you must disobey unlawful orders, because the oath of loyalty you take is to the Constitution, not to a commander who may give you an unlawful order, not to the Secretary of Defense, and not to the President of the United States. Here is where the challenge and the complication comes in. If you tell a soldier, a military member, to shoot and kill that unarmed civilian who is posing no danger to anybody, that is obviously and patently an unlawful order, and a soldier not only may disobey it, but must disobey it. But, there's so much nuance, I'm sorry to say, in, the president ordered, and that order was handed down through the Secretary of Defense to my commander, ordered us to deploy to the streets of, for example, Chicago. Am I, as a military member, as a soldier, going to be in a position to say, let me evaluate whether this order to deploy is truly lawful, it's unlawful, what have the courts said, are there stays in effect, has the Supreme Court ruled? That's not something you can ask a soldier or a sailor or a seaman, a Marine, to do. You can't, it's not practical. So the reality is, to answer your question directly, every military member must disobey unlawful orders, but the proof is in the pudding. What exactly is the unlawful order that's being given? I would suggest that it's an unlawful order when you direct somebody to kill human beings in a boat in international waters, because there's no legal authority, not under civilian law, not under the law of war, not under military law, to kill people in international waters who are presenting no imminent risk to anyone, and we are not in a declared war with any nation, so there is no lawful authority to do it. I don't think whoever the drone operator is who is receiving the order, I don't know who the order is being handed down through to kill people, murder people in international waters. I think the drone operator, quite frankly, which is how these strikes are carried out, should disobey that order and should, run the risk of then having a court-martial case brought against them, because they will be able to stand up and say, that's a patently unlawful order. That's why I disobeyed it, because I took an oath to do so. But, these are challenging times, including for our military members who, frankly, Brian, are being put at risk as much as everybody else is being put at risk by a lawless commander-in-chief.
Well, obviously a lot to continue discussing on all of these issues. So for those who are watching, if you'd like to follow along with legal news, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. It's a great way to support our work. It's a great way to support independent media, and it's 100% free. So again, those links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.